She covered her bruises in silence, until the mountain man saw what no one else would asterisk. The first thing Silas Ward noticed was not the woman's beauty. It was the way she stood too still. Not calm, not proud, too still, like a deer that had heard a branch crack somewhere behind it and knew running too soon could be worse than not running at all. The stagecoach had rolled into Pine Hollow under a hard gray sky, dragging mud and half-frozen slush behind its wheels. The horses were breathing white clouds. The driver was cussing the road. A few men outside Miller's Mercantile stepped forward to see who had come, because in a mountain town, a stranger was never a small thing. Then she climbed down. She held one brown carpetbag with both hands, tight against her ribs. Her coat was dark wool, worn at the cuffs, buttoned high to her throat, though the wind was not the only cold thing in the street. A faded blue ribbon held her hair back, but loose strands had come free around her face. She looked tired in a way sleep could not fix. Silas Ward stood near the hitching rail and watched her take in the town. Pine Hollow was no place for soft dreams. It was a high country settlement tucked beneath the Bitterroot ridges, with a church bell that cracked in winter, a trading post that smelled of coffee and old leather, and a road that turned mean the moment snow touched it. Men came there because they had something to hunt, cut, mine, hide from, or forget. Women rarely arrived alone. And this woman looked like she had crossed more than miles. "Mrs. Bellamy?" Silas asked. Her eyes moved to him fast, too fast. She measured his height, his shoulders, his hands, the distance between them, the open mercantile door behind her, and the wagon beside him. She did all that before she answered. "Yes." Her voice was soft but not weak. "I'm Silas Ward." She gave one small nod. "I know." That was all. No smile, no reaching hand, no nervous question about the cabin, the road, or the marriage papers that had brought her here. Silas had written to the territorial marriage registry 6 months ago, after a winter so quiet it had almost taken the sound of his own voice from him. He had not asked for a young bride or a pretty one. He had asked for a steady woman, one who understood work, distance, and hard weather. The agency had answered with one name. Clara Bellamy, widow, 32, able to cook, sew, read, keep accounts, and manage a household. There had been no mention of the way she held her breath when a man stepped too close. Silas took off his hat. His dark hair was flattened by the cold, and his beard held bits of frost from the ride down the mountain. He was 39, wide-shouldered, quiet, and weathered by years of timber work and trap lines. Most people in Pine Hollow thought he was a hard man because he did not waste words. Clara seemed to be deciding whether hard meant dangerous. "You had a long ride," he said. "It was tolerable." "You hungry?" She hesitated before answering, as if hunger was a thing that needed permission. "I can wait." "You don't have to." Her fingers tightened around the handle of the carpetbag. Silas noticed. He noticed everything in the high country: a wrong wind, a nervous horse, a silence where birds should have been. And now he noticed this woman's hand trembling inside a glove she was trying to keep still. "There's stew inside," he said, nodding toward the mercantile. "Road to my cabin takes near 2 hours. Better to eat while there's a stove close." She looked past him to the wagon. "Your cabin is far." "Far enough that no one comes without a reason." Something flickered in her face then. Not relief exactly, but the shape of it buried deep. "All right," she said. Inside Miller's Mercantile, the air was warm and heavy with beans, coffee, tobacco, and damp wool. Clara stepped in behind Silas and stopped just inside the door, her back near the wall. She did not take the chair he pulled out until he had already sat down across from it. Silas pretended not to notice. Mrs. Miller set 2 bowls of stew on the table and glanced at Clara with open curiosity. "You must be Mrs. Bellamy." Clara's shoulders lifted slightly. Yes, ma'am. Long way from Missouri. Clara's face changed so little that most would have missed it. Silas did not. A shadow passed through her eyes, quick as a hawk over snow. Yes, she said, a long way. Mrs. Miller, sensing something she could not name, left them alone. For several minutes they ate in silence. Clara waited until Silas picked up his spoon before she touched hers. She took small bites, careful and controlled, as though even at a table she had learned not to draw attention. Silas broke a piece of bread and slid the rest toward her. She stared at it, then at him. It's just bread, he said gently. I know. But her voice said she did not know that any kindness was ever just kindness. He looked down into his bowl. Cabin has 2 rooms, main room and a back sleeping room. You'll take the sleeping room. Her spoon stopped. I'll sleep by the stove, he continued. There's a door between. It has a latch on your side. For the first time, Clara looked directly at him for more than a breath. A latch? Yes. On my side. Yes. Her lips pressed together, and her gaze dropped quickly, but not before Silas saw the moisture in her eyes. She swallowed it down like she had swallowed many things before. That is considerate, she said. No, Silas answered, it's decent. Clara said nothing, but her hand loosened around the spoon. Outside, a wagon wheel struck a rut in the street with a sharp crack. Clara flinched so hard her knee hit the underside of the table. The spoon fell from her hand and clattered against the bowl. Every head in the mercantile turned. Clara froze. Her face went white, then controlled, then empty. The speed of it made Silas's chest tighten. It was not the flinch that hurt to see. It was how quickly she punished herself for it. I'm sorry, she whispered, reaching for the spoon. I'm sorry. Silas set his own spoon down slowly. Nothing broke. She nodded too many times. Yes, of course. Nobody else spoke. Mrs. Miller turned back to the stove. The merchant near the counter pretended to read a flour label. The room remembered how to breathe. But Clara did not. Silas leaned back a little, giving her space without making a show of it. Wagon wheels make ugly sounds in this mud, he said, as if nothing strange had happened. That's all. Clara stared into her stew. After a moment, her shoulders lowered a fraction. They finished the meal quietly. When they stepped back outside, the sky had darkened, and a thin snow had begun to fall. Silas lifted her carpetbag from the ground, but the moment his hand touched the handle, Clara jerked it back against her body. Not rude. Not angry. Terrified. Then she caught herself and looked away. You may take it, she said. I did not mean to. I should have asked. She looked at him then, confused. Silas held out his hand, palm open, not reaching. May I load your bag? The question seemed to do something to her, something small but sharp, like a key turning in an old lock. Yes, she said quietly, thank you. He placed the bag in the wagon bed and helped her up without touching her more than necessary. She sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. As Pine Hollow disappeared behind them, the mountains rose black and blue through the falling snow. The wagon climbed into timber country, where the trees stood tall and silent, and the wind moved like a low voice through the pines. Clara did not ask about the cabin. Silas did not ask about Missouri. But halfway up the road, a branch snapped under the weight of ice. Clara threw both arms over her head. The motion lasted only a second. Then she sat straight again, hands back in her lap, face calm, eyes forward. Silas kept the horses steady. Old pine, he said. Ice takes the weak branches first. Clara nodded once. But Silas knew. That woman had not learned to fear branches. She had learned to fear what came after loud sounds. By the time they reached the cabin, night had folded over the mountain. Warm light from the small windows spilled across the snow. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. The two-room cabin stood alone among the pines, rough but strong, with split logs stacked beneath the eaves and a lantern swinging by the door. Clara looked at it for a long moment. "This is yours?" she asked. "Ours for now," Silas said. Her head turned slightly. He did not correct himself. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, ashes, and cold iron. Silas lit the lamps while Clara stood near the door, still holding her gloves, still waiting as if every new room had rules someone might punish her for not knowing. "The back room is there," Silas said. "Blankets in the chest. Window latch works, door latch too." She nodded. Then she did something that made him ache in a place he had not known was still soft. She walked to the back room, opened the door, looked inside, touched the latch with 2 fingers, and only then carried her bag in. "Good night, Mr. Ward," she said. "Silas," he answered, "if you want." She held his gaze for 1 second. "Good night, Silas." Then she closed the door. A moment later, the latch slid into place. Silas stood alone by the stove, listening to the wind press against the cabin walls. He had asked for a wife to share the winter, but the woman behind that latch door had brought a whole hidden storm with her. And before morning came, Silas Ward would begin to understand that some pain did not show itself in tears. Some pain hid beneath sleeves, beneath silence, beneath a dress buttoned high to the throat. And some men only saw it when it was almost too late. By morning, Clara Bellamy had already learned the cabin. Silas knew because when he opened his eyes, the stove was burning low and steady, the coffee pot had been moved to the warm side, and the 2 tin cups he owned had been washed and set upside down on a folded cloth near the basin. He lay still on the cot for a moment, staring at the rafters. He had lived alone in that cabin for 11 years. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every draft near the north wall, every sound the chimney made when wind turned down from the ridge. He knew exactly where he kept the flour, the salt, the coffee, the lamp oil, and the spare nails. Yet in one morning, Clara had moved through his home like a quiet hand had passed over it. Not changing it, not taking command. Simply putting small things right. He sat up and looked toward the table. She was already there, wrapped in her dark shawl, both hands around a cup of coffee. Her hair was pinned again, neat and plain, but a few loose strands rested against her cheek. She looked toward the window, not at anything outside, but somewhere beyond it. Somewhere far past the mountain pines and the thin blue dawn. Then she heard him move. In an instant, she was back in the room. "Good morning," she said. "Morning. I made coffee." "I see that. I hope that was not improper." Silas pulled on his boots slowly. "Coffee being made before I get up is about the least improper thing I can think of." She looked down into her cup as if deciding whether that was a joke. Maybe it was. Silas was not fully sure himself. "I checked the bread tin," she said. "You have enough flour for 2 weeks if used carefully, less if weather keeps you from hunting." "You checked supplies already." Her shoulders stiffened. "I should have asked." "No," he said, "you did right." She did not answer, but he saw the smallest breath leave her. Silas stood and poured coffee. He kept his movements slow. Not false slow, not the way a man performs gentleness to be admired for it, just steady. Clara noticed motion the way a skittish horse noticed rope, too sudden, and something in her shut tight. "What needs doing today?" she asked. "Not much. I need to mend a hinge on the smokehouse door, bring in more wood before the next snow, check the lean-to roof. I can sweep, wash the travel dust from my things, and start bread if you have yeast." "There is yeast." Then I'll start bread." He nodded. That was the way their first full day began. Not with soft words, not with promises, with coffee, flour, cold water, and a list of work plain enough to stand on. Silas went outside before the sun cleared the ridge. The cold bit his cheeks the moment he stepped off the porch. Snow from the night before lay thin across the yard, and the horses shifted under the lean-to, stamping at the frozen ground. He took an axe to the woodpile and split until his shoulders warmed. Through the cabin window, he could see Clara moving. She was quick with work but not careless. She swept the floor in long, even strokes. She opened the flour sack and folded the top down properly. She wiped shelves, counted jars, checked the latch on the back window, then checked it again when she thought no one could see. Silas leaned on the axe and watched only a moment before looking away. A woman did not check a window latch twice because she liked tidy windows. By noon, the cabin smelled of bread. It had been so long since that smell filled the room that Silas stopped in the doorway and forgot to step inside. Warm dough, wood smoke, coffee, a little cinnamon from somewhere he did not even know he owned. It changed the cabin, softened the logs, lifted something from the corners. Clara stood at the table with sleeves rolled only to her wrists, pressing dough with the heels of her hands. "There was cinnamon in a blue tin," she said without looking up. "It had not spoiled. I forgot I had it." "You forget many things on your shelves." "I noticed." She glanced at him, almost quick enough to be missed. For a second, something near humor touched her eyes. Then it was gone. Silas hung his coat on the peg. A strip of leather slipped from the pocket and fell to the floor beside him. He bent for it at the same moment. Clara reached to pick up the bread knife from the table. The knife handle knocked against a tin plate. A sharp metallic ring snapped through the cabin. Clara dropped so fast Silas barely saw the movement. One moment she stood at the table. The next she was crouched beside it, one arm raised over her head, the other hand pressed against her ribs as if guarding something already wounded. The cabin went silent except for the stove ticking. Silas did not move. The dough sat half-shaped on the table. Flour dust hung in the light. Clara stayed crouched, breathing hard through her nose, eyes fixed on the floor as though she could will herself to vanish into the planks. Slowly, terribly slowly, she realized where she was. Her arm lowered. Color rushed into her face, then drained again. "I'm sorry," she said, rising too quickly. "That was foolish. I don't know why I did that." Silas kept his voice low. Plate made a sharp sound. "I know. Sharp sounds startle folks. Not like that." He did not answer right away. Her hands trembled, so she pressed them flat into the dough, as if she could hide shaking by turning it into work. "Clara," he said. Her body went still at her name. "You don't have to explain things you're not ready to explain." She stared down at the dough. "I was not always like this." The words came so quietly, he almost missed them. Silas stood near the door, cold still clinging to his coat, and felt something inside him pull tight. "I believe you." She looked up then, suspicious of kindness, suspicious of belief, suspicious most of all of a man who did not demand more than she had offered. "You don't know me." "No." "Then how can you believe me?" He thought about that. Outside, one horse blew hard through its nose. Wind brushed snow from the roof in a soft slide. "Because fear like that has roots," he said. "It does not grow in a person overnight." Her face changed. "Not much. But enough." She looked away first. "I should finish the bread," she said. So he let her. That afternoon passed with more care between them than before. Not comfort. Not yet. Comfort was too large a word for two strangers inside a mountain cabin with one locked room and too many unsaid things. but care had begun to enter the space quietly, like warmth through a wall after the stove has burned long enough. Silas mended the smokehouse hinge. Clara shaped 2 loaves and placed them near the stove to rise. She scrubbed the basin, sorted dried beans, and repaired a tear in one of his work shirts with stitches so fine he had to hold the cloth close to see them. When he noticed, she said, it was coming apart at the shoulder. "I see that. You work hard in your clothes." "I suppose I do." "You should mend them before they fail, not after." He looked at the shirt in his hands. "That sounds wise." "It is not wisdom, it is poverty." The words came plain, without bitterness. Then she seemed to regret them. Silas folded the shirt carefully. "Poverty teaches better than comfort sometimes." Clara's eyes lifted to his. "You speak as if you know." "I know some." She waited, but he did not continue. He had old wounds too, though none as visible as the one she hid. A father who drank himself hollow, a mother buried when Silas was 14, a younger brother lost in spring floodwater because Silas had not been fast enough. Some grief turned into noise. His had turned into silence. Clara seemed to understand that silence, though not its shape. That evening, while the bread cooled and the stew simmered, she asked to step outside. "Just to see the yard," she said. "I'll show you." Her fingers tightened around her shawl. "I can go alone." The words were not rude, they were frightened. Silas nodded. "All right, watch the ice near the pump." She took the lantern and stepped onto the porch. From the window, he saw her stand beneath the open sky. She did not go far. She walked to the woodpile, then the lean-to, then the fence near the first line of trees. She turned slowly, studying the cabin, the barn, the road, the slope beyond the creek. She was not admiring the view. She was learning the edges. When she came back inside, her cheeks were bright from the cold, and her breathing seemed easier. "The fence south of the lean-to leans," she said. "Frost heave. It will fail if snow piles heavy against it. You know fences. I know what happens when things are left weak too long." Silas looked at her. She looked back, then lowered her eyes. "I can help set it tomorrow," she said. "If you want." "I do." After supper they sat across from each other at the table. Silas sharpened a draw-knife. Clara mended the cuff of her own coat. The lamps burned steady. Outside, darkness gathered thick among the pines. For a while, the quiet between them was almost peaceful. Then Clara spoke. "Did the agency tell you I was a widow?" "Yes." "Did they tell you anything else?" "No." Her needle stopped halfway through the cloth. "My husband's name was Thomas Bellamy." Silas set the drawknife down, not loudly. Clara kept her eyes on the needle. "He was respected where we lived." Silas waited. He knew how to speak in public, knew when to lower his voice, knew how to make people think he was patient. The fire popped in the stove. Clara flinched, but this time she did not apologize. "That is all I will say tonight," she whispered. Silas nodded once. "Then that is enough for tonight." Her needle moved again, though her hand was no longer steady. A few minutes later she rose, folded the coat and carried it to the back room. At the doorway she stopped. "Silas." "Yes." "You said the latch is on my side." "It is." "If I use it, will it offend you?" Something in his chest hurt at how carefully she asked. "No," he said. "Use it as long as you need." She stood there with her back to him. "And if I do not use it someday?" He looked at the fire, then back at her. "Then I will still stay on my side of the door." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she went into the room and closed the door. The latch slid into place, but softer than the night before. Silas sat alone at the table, the drawknife untouched beside his hand, while the first loaf of bread cooled near the stove. The cabin smelled warm now, almost alive. Yet behind that closed door was a woman who had just given him a name. Thomas Bellamy. And Silas knew, with a cold certainty deep as winter, that dead men could still cast long shadows. Before that shadow left his cabin, it would reach for Clara one more time. The next morning, Clara did not speak Thomas Bellamy's name. Silas did not speak it either. Some names were not meant to be dragged into daylight before a person had strength enough to look at them. So he let the name stay where she had placed it the night before, on the table between them, not ignored, not chased, simply waiting. Snow fell lightly after breakfast, not enough to stop work, just enough to soften the yard and make every fence rail look older than it was. Clara stood by the window with her coffee, watching the flakes gather along the lean-to roof. "You said the south fence leans," Silas said. She turned. "It does." "Then we'll fix it." There was a brief pause before she answered, "We." "You saw it. I have the post mall." That almost brought something to her mouth, not a smile yet but the memory of one. "Then yes, we." They bundled against the cold and went out together. The morning air cut sharp through wool, but Clara did not complain. She walked beside Silas with a coil of rope over one arm and a small hammer tucked in her belt. She had tied her dress higher from the mud with practical knots, and her boots struck the ground with careful purpose. Silas noticed how she watched everything. The low wash near the creek, the timber line, the wagon road, the places a rider might appear if he did not want to be heard too soon. At the south fence, Clara knelt without being told and pressed both gloved hands against the leaning post. She rocked it gently, testing the give. "Ground is soft on this side," she said. "If we only straighten it, it will lean again." Silas rested the maul against his shoulder. "What do you suggest?" She looked up, surprised he had asked. "A brace on the windward side. Pack stone below the soil if you have any loose rock, then tamp it tight." "I do." "Then it will hold." He nodded. "Show me where you want the brace." Her eyes held his for a moment, uncertain. Then she rose and moved into the work as if it had been waiting for her. She pointed, measured with her hands, tested the tension of the wire, and marked where the brace should lean. Silas followed her lead without comment. That did more to Clara than praise would have. She had known men who asked questions only to trap the answer, men who gave tools but not authority, men who smiled in public and corrected in private. Silas simply handed her the hammer when she reached for it, brought stones when she asked, and held the post steady while she set the brace. The work took nearly 2 hours. By the time they finished, her cheeks were pink from cold and loose hair had escaped at her temple. She stepped back, hands on her hips, and studied the fence. "That will hold." Silas looked at the post. "Yes, it will." "You sound surprised." "I am." Her face closed slightly. He added, "Not that you knew how, that you improved my fence in less time than I've spent complaining about it." She blinked. Then, for the first time since she had arrived, Clara gave a real small laugh. It was quiet, almost startled out of her. It vanished quickly, as if she had not meant to let it escape. But Silas heard it. The sound changed the yard. A horse shifted under the lean-to. Snow tapped against dry leaves in the brush. The world did not crack open. No punishment came for laughter. Clara seemed to notice that too. She looked away, but the hard line around her mouth had softened. "If this moment warmed your heart," the narrator might have said to anyone listening beyond that mountain, "stay with Clara and Silas a little longer, because sometimes the smallest laugh is the first proof that a broken spirit has not been broken forever." They carried the tools back to the cabin near noon. Inside, Clara removed her gloves and went straight to the stove, but she moved differently. Not lighter exactly, but less folded in. Her shoulders did not sit so high. She hummed once under her breath while stirring beans in the pot, then stopped the moment she realized it. Silas said nothing. Some first things needed privacy. After dinner, he took his ledger from the shelf and began marking the work done. South fence repaired, firewood half stacked, smokehouse hinge mended. Clara sat across from him, darning a sock with even stitches. "You keep accounts?" she asked. "Poorly." "May I see?" He slid the ledger over. She studied the pages and her brow tightened. "Not judgment, focus. You write purchases but not use." "Use?" "If you buy 50 pounds of flour and do not mark when you open a sack, you cannot know how long supplies truly last." "I count with my eyes." "That works until winter traps you and your eyes wish they had numbers." Silas leaned back. "You have a sharp way of saying useful things." "I can soften it." "No need." She looked at him, needle paused. "Most men prefer soft." "Most men are hungry by February." Again, that faint almost smile touched her face. She turned the ledger toward herself and reached for the pencil. Then she stopped. "May I?" "It's paper, Clara." "To some men, paper is power." Silas looked at her then fully. Her eyes dropped to the ledger. He said quietly, "In this house, paper is paper. If you can make sense of it, make sense of it." She nodded once and began rewriting his supply accounts in a cleaner order. For the next hour, the cabin was filled with small sounds: pencil scratching, firewood settling, wind along the eaves, the soft pull of thread through wool. It was the kind of ordinary peace that some people never think to be grateful for because it has always belonged to them. Clara handled it like something fragile. Near sunset, as Silas stepped out to check the horses, a rider appeared on the lower road. He was a broad man in a buffalo coat, riding a sorrel gelding with a white blaze. Silas recognized him before he reached the yard. Jonah Pike, a freighter from Pine Hollow, sometimes brought supplies up the mountain when the road was not too mean. Loud voice, good heart, no sense of how sound traveled in a small room. "Ward," Jonah called before he was even off his horse, "you alive up here or frozen solid?" Inside the cabin, something dropped. Silas heard it through the door. He turned his head. Clara stood just inside by the table, one hand gripping the ledger, her face emptied of color. Jonah's voice had filled the yard like a thrown stone through glass. Silas lifted a hand to Jonah. "Keep your voice down." Jonah stopped mid-step, puzzled. "What?" "Quiet." The freighter looked past him and saw Clara in the doorway. His grin widened, too friendly, too big. "Well now, this must be Mrs. Ward." Clara's fingers tightened around the ledger until the paper bent. Silas stepped slightly between them, not enough to insult Jonah, enough for Clara to feel the space. "Mrs. Bellamy," Silas said. Jonah's eyebrows rose, but for once he had the sense not to ask. "I brought nails, lamp oil, and that coffee you ordered," Jonah said, lowering his voice badly but trying. "Also a letter came through Ridgeback. Figured it might be for the lady." Clara went completely still. Silas felt it before he saw it. "A letter?" he asked. Jonah pulled a folded envelope from inside his coat. "Came care of the agency office, then to Ridgeback, then Miller sent it with me. Name says Clara Bellamy." He held it out. Clara did not move. Silas took the envelope instead. The paper was clean, too clean for Mountain Post, with a careful hand across the front. "Mrs. Clara Bellamy." No town, no cabin, no married name. Just the old name, written as if it still owned her. "Who is it from?" Silas asked quietly. Clara stared at the envelope. Her lips parted but no sound came. Jonah, finally reading the room, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'll unload the supplies." Silas nodded, still watching Clara. Jonah brought in the crates and left faster than he had arrived. When his horse's hooves faded down the road, the cabin became too quiet. Clara sat at the table. Silas placed the letter in front of her, but did not push it closer. She looked at it as if it might move. "Do you know the hand?" he asked. "Yes. Thomas." She shook her head. "My husband had a brother." Silas waited. Silas Bellamy. He was an elder in their church, a man people trusted because he knew how to sound grieved while doing cruel things politely. The wind pressed snow against the window. Clara lifted one hand toward the letter, then stopped. Her fingers curled back into her palm. "He wanted me to stay after Thomas died," she said. "He said it was for my safety. He said a widow belonged under the protection of the church." "But you left." "Yes." "Why would he write now?" Her eyes did not leave the envelope. "Because Thomas left land," she said. "Good bottom land near the Missouri. My name is on the deed too, though Thomas tried to make people forget that. If I remain widowed under their church care, Elias can control it through the board. If I remarry out here, their claim weakens." Silas's jaw tightened. Clara finally took the letter. Her hands trembled as she opened it, but she opened it. Her eyes moved across the page. With each line, her face became less afraid. And more hard. Silas had not seen that in her before. She set the letter down. "What does it say?" he asked. "He is coming west." The room seemed to shrink. "When?" "It says he has business in Ridgeback before winter deepens." She swallowed. "It says he hopes to bring me home before I make a decision that cannot be undone." Silas looked at the letter, then at her. "You are not going anywhere you do not choose." Clara's eyes rose slowly. There were tears in them, but not only tears. Something else had entered. Anger. Long buried, thin but alive. "You don't know men like Silas Bellamy," she said. "No," Silas answered, "but I know this mountain." She folded the letter with careful hands. Then she reached for her carpetbag near the wall and pulled it into her lap. Silas watched as she opened it, turned back the inner lining, and removed a smaller packet wrapped in cloth and stitched flat. He stared at it. "You hid papers in your bag." "I hid proof," she said. Her voice was quiet now, but the fear had moved behind something stronger. She laid the cloth packet on the table between them. And for the first time since she had arrived in Pine Hollow, Clara Bellamy looked less like a woman running from a past. She looked like a woman preparing to face it. Clara did not open the cloth packet right away. She sat at the table with both hands resting on it, her fingers spread over the faded fabric as if she could feel the past breathing underneath. The cabin was quiet around her. The fire had settled low. Outside, the last light of day was fading behind the pines, turning the snow blue. Silas stood near the stove, not too close to her, not too far. He had learned that distance mattered to Clara. Too close, and her body remembered old fear. Too far, and she seemed to stand alone inside herself again. So he stayed where she could see him without feeling cornered. The letter from Silas Bellamy lay folded beside the packet. It was only paper, but it had changed the whole room. "He was always careful with words," Clara said at last. Silas waited. Thomas used anger like a whip. Elias used concern. That made him more dangerous in public. She looked down at the packet. "When he said he wanted to protect me, people believed him. When he said I was troubled, people believed that too." Silas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "What is in the packet?" "Proof that I was never as helpless as they thought." She untied the thread around the cloth and opened it layer by layer. First came a folded deed, creased from being hidden too long, then a marriage certificate, then 3 letters tied with a blue string. Last, a paper sealed in a brown envelope, the edges worn from travel. Clara arranged them carefully on the table. Her hands trembled, but her eyes did not. "This is the land deed," she said, touching the first paper. 120 acres near the Missouri Bend. My father bought half of it before I married Thomas. When he died, his portion came to me. Thomas signed papers joining the land, but he never removed my name. He tried twice. Why did he fail? Because the county clerk was my father's cousin and would not file the change without my signature. And you refused. Her mouth pulled tight, not loudly. Refusing loudly was not safe. I misplaced the paper, then spilled lamp oil on the second copy, then told Thomas I had signed it and must have left it in the church office. For the first time that evening, Silas almost smiled. Clara saw it. What? Nothing. You looked amused. I am wondering how many men thought you were weak, because you spoke softly while you were outsmarting them. She stared at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the papers, but there was a faint warmth in her face that had not been there before. I did what I could, she said. Small things, quiet things, things that did not look like fighting. Still fighting. She did not answer, but the words settled somewhere inside her. She opened the letters next. These are from Elias. The first came after Thomas died, the second when I left Missouri. The third was waiting for me in Ridgeback when I passed through, but I never answered it. Silas picked up none of them. May I read? She slid them toward him. He read slowly. The first letter was written in a polished hand. Brotherly concern, community duty, a widow's proper place, the need to remain among those who knew what was best for her. The second had the same gentle tone, but beneath it ran something harder. It spoke of legal confusion, unfinished property matters, and the danger of making decisions while grieving. The third was worse because it did not threaten openly. It did not need to. Mrs. Bellamy, it said, your late husband's wishes must not be ignored. The elders are prepared to correct any misunderstanding before your choices bring shame upon you. Silas folded the last letter carefully and set it down. Shame, he said. Clara's eyes stayed on the flame in the stove. That was their favorite word. You are not ashamed. I was, she said, for a long time, not because I had done wrong, but because everyone around me acted like pain was a stain I had caused. She reached for the brown envelope and held it in both hands. This is the one that matters most. She opened it and took out a statement written in a doctor's neat hand. Silas watched her face as she unfolded it. Something in her hardened, not from cruelty, but from strength forced awake. Dr. Nathaniel Reed treated me many times, she said. He said little, wrote even less, but before I left he came to the house after dark. He stood in the kitchen like a man waiting for judgment and gave me this. She passed it to Silas. He read the statement once. Then again. The doctor had listed dates, injuries, explanations given by Thomas Bellamy, then besides several of them his own notes. Inconsistent with fall. Inconsistent with accident. Signs of repeated force. Silas's hand tightened on the paper. He had seen broken men before, men dragged out of mines, men struck by falling timber, men hurt by horses, axes, storms, and bad luck. But there was something different about words written calmly beside a woman's suffering, something colder than blood, something that made the room feel smaller. He knew, Silas said. Yes. And did nothing. Clara's mouth twisted. He said he was sorry. Silas looked up. She gave a humorless little breath. Sorry is easy when the danger is dead. The stove cracked softly. This time Clara did not flinch. Silas set the statement down with care, as if the paper itself deserved respect because it had carried what no one else had been willing to hold. "If Elias comes," he said, "this can stop him." "It can shame him," Clara answered. "That is different. Men like Elias can survive truth if they can make it look disorderly, emotional, bitter, a woman's wounded imagination. Then we make it orderly." She looked at him. "We put every paper in order," Silas said. "We take it to someone in Ridgeback who knows law. We record what must be recorded. If Elias arrives with soft words and hard intentions, he finds the ground already claimed." Clara stared at him, as if he had opened a door she had not believed was real. "You would do that?" "Yes." "This is not your trouble." Silas leaned one hand on the back of the chair across from her. "You are under my roof. That does not make my past yours." "No," he said, "but it means it cannot walk in here and treat you like you are alone." Clara looked down quickly. Her fingers found the edge of the doctor's paper and held it flat. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I need to tell you something worse." Silas felt the sentence land between them. "All right." "Thomas did not die the way people think." The air changed. Silas did not move. "The agency said you were widowed by accident." "That is what everyone said." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands had begun to tremble again. "A horse kicked him in the barn. He died before the doctor arrived." "And that was not true." "It was true," she swallowed, "but not all of it." Silas sat down slowly. Clara kept her eyes on the papers, speaking as if looking at him would make the words too heavy. "It was morning, cold, there was frost on the trough. Thomas had been angry for 2 days because I had misplaced another paper Elias wanted signed. He followed me into the barn. He cornered me near the stalls. The gray gelding was nervous already. Thomas shouted. I moved back. He grabbed my sleeve." She stopped. Silas's voice was quiet. "You do not have to finish tonight." "Yes," she whispered, "I do." The wind moved around the cabin. Clara pressed her palm against the table. "The horse kicked because Thomas struck the stall gate. The animal panicked. I did not touch him. I did not push him. I did not lift a hand. But when he fell, I stood there." Her eyes finally rose to Silas. "And for a few seconds, I did not call for help." The confession hung in the room like breath in winter air. Silas did not speak too fast. He knew this was the place where the wrong word could do damage. "How many seconds?" "I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 10. It felt longer." "Was he alive?" "Yes." Her voice broke on that single word, but she steadied it. "He was breathing. I could hear him. And I stood there thinking if he got up, he would blame me. If he got up, I would not survive what came next." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she did not wipe them. "Then I ran for the hired hand, then the doctor, then the church. I did everything a wife was supposed to do, but those seconds, Silas." She tapped her own chest with 2 fingers. "Those seconds stayed in me. Elias does not know, but I do, I know." Silas looked at the woman across from him. Not guilty. Not cruel. A woman who had lived so long beneath another person's hand that even a breath of hesitation had become a crime in her own mind. "You were afraid," he said. "I was relieved." "You were afraid," he repeated gently but firmly, "and hurt, and trapped. Relief does not make you wicked, Clara. It means you knew the danger had stopped." She shut her eyes. The tears slipped then, quiet and hot down her cheeks. "I prayed to feel sorrow," she whispered. "At the funeral, when they spoke about his kindness, his leadership, his faith. I stood there in black and prayed to feel something decent, but all I felt was air, like a door had opened and I could breathe for the first time in 9 years." Silas felt the ache of that move through him. He had no grand words for it, no preacher's answer, no clean sentence to make a thing like that easy, so he gave her the only truth he had. "I am glad you breathed." Clara stared at him. The tears kept falling, but her face changed. Not healed, not freed. Seen. That was the word. For the first time, she looked like someone had seen the full shape of her guilt and had not stepped away from her. Silas reached toward the table, then stopped, leaving his hand open on the wood between them. Clara looked at his hand. A long moment passed. Then she placed her fingertips lightly against his palm. Not fully. Not trust yet. But a beginning. Outside, the mountain wind pressed against the cabin and carried snow through the dark. Somewhere in the lean-to, a horse shifted and sighed. Inside, Clara Bellamy sat with her hidden papers, her hidden guilt, and the first man who had listened without trying to own the story. But neither of them knew that by speaking Thomas Bellamy's name aloud, they had started a chain of events already moving toward the cabin. Because 3 days later, a rider from Ridgeback would arrive breathless at the door. And the news he carried would make Clara's hands go cold. Silas Bellamy was not coming someday. He had already reached town. The rider from Ridgeback came in just before noon, pushing his horse hard enough that steam rolled off the animal's flanks. Clara saw him first. She had been outside near the lean-to, shaking frost from a feed blanket when the sound reached her. Hooves on frozen ground, fast, too fast for a neighbor, too urgent for a supply rider. Her whole body went still, but this time she did not duck behind the wall or reach for the nearest door. She stood with the blanket in her hands and watched the road. Silas came out behind her a moment later, wiping pine dust from his sleeves. "You hear that?" he asked. "Yes." The horse appeared between the lower pines, dark against the snow. The man riding it leaned low in the saddle, one hand holding his hat down, the other tight on the reins. "That's Jonah Pike," Silas said. Clara's fingers tightened in the blanket. Jonah did not call out this time. He had learned something the last time he came up the mountain. He rode straight into the yard, pulled the horse to a hard stop, and swung down with his face red from cold. "Silas," he said, breathless, "Mrs. Bellamy." Clara noticed he did not call her Mrs. Ward this time. Some men learned slowly. Jonah at least learned. "What happened?" Silas asked. Jonah looked from him to Clara, then back again. "Man came into Ridgeback yesterday evening. Black coat, clean boots, talks like a preacher, and a banker had the same mother." Clara's hands went cold inside her gloves. "Silas," she said. Jonah nodded. He asked after the marriage registry, asked after stagecoach records, asked whether a widow from Missouri passed through with a mountain man named Ward. Silas's face hardened. "Who told him?" "Not Miller, not me, but Ridgeback-S got more ears than windows. Someone must have." Jonah rubbed his jaw. "He's staying at Harker's boarding room. Says he came on church business and legal business both." Clara folded the blanket slowly over her arm. The old fear came first. It always did. It rose fast like icy creek water, trying to fill her chest and drown her breath. For 9 years, a Bellamy man entering a room had meant she needed to become smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. But something else rose with it now. A memory. Her own voice at Silas's table. "I hid proof." Her hand on the doctor's statement. The deed with her name, still written plainly beside Thomas's. She breathed in once, then again. "When will he come here?" she asked. Jonah glanced at Silas. He was asking about the mountain road. "Weather's fair today. If he finds someone foolish enough to guide him, maybe tomorrow. If he rides alone, could be sooner or not at all, depending how much sense the man has." Elias always had too much confidence in his own sense, Clara said. Silas looked at her. Then we prepare for soon. Jonah shifted his weight, uncomfortable. There's more. The yard seemed to quiet. Clara looked at him. He's telling folks you ain't well, Jonah said carefully. Says grief confused you. Says you ran off under influence of a stranger. Says your late husband's church is worried you might be taken advantage of. Clara's face did not change. That frightened Silas more than if she had cried. Jonah hurried on. I don't believe it. Miller don't either. But talk spreads quicker than fire in dry grass. I figured you should know before it climbed up here behind him. Clara looked past Jonah to the road. Snow lay smooth between the wagon tracks, bright beneath the pale sky. The world looked clean enough to make lies seem impossible. But lies did not need dirt to grow. They only needed willing mouths. Thank you for telling us, she said. Jonah took off his hat and held it against his chest. Ma'am, I don't know your trouble and won't pretend I do, but I know the sound of a man polishing a story before he sells it. That one's been polishing hard. For the first time, Clara looked at him with something like gratitude. I know that sound too, she said. Silas stepped toward Jonah's horse. You'll take coffee before you ride down. Jonah looked ready to refuse, then saw Silas's face and thought better of it. Coffee would sit kindly. Inside, Clara moved with a calm that was almost frightening. She poured coffee, cut bread, set out butter. Her hands did not shake until she reached for the knife, and even then the tremor lasted only a moment. Jonah sat near the door, careful not to fill the room with his voice. Silas stood by the stove, arms crossed, watching Clara more than the visitor. She knew he was watching. She also knew why. After Jonah finished his coffee and left with one last warning to keep the lower gate tied, the cabin settled into a silence different from all the others. This was not the silence of two strangers. It was the silence before a decision. Clara gathered the cups and carried them to the basin. Silas said, You do not have to face him here. She kept her back to him. Where would I face him? We can go to Ridgeback, speak to Harker, find the notary, get ahead of it there. And walk into town while Elias tells everyone I am confused and carried off by a mountain man, she turned then. Her eyes were bright but steady. No, if I run down the mountain his story looks true. Silas nodded slowly. Then we stay. We do more than stay. He waited. Clara dried her hands on a cloth, then went to the shelf where she had placed the packet of papers. She carried it to the table and laid every document out in order again. Deed, marriage certificate, Elias' letters, the church board's paper, Dr. Reed's statement. I need 3 copies made, she said. 1 for the territorial office, 1 for the notary in Ridgeback, 1 to keep here. Silas raised an eyebrow. You plan to copy all that by hand before he arrives? Yes. That will take hours. Then I should start. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. I can write. She stopped. There it was again, that moment when help felt almost more dangerous to her than hardship. This is my evidence, she said. Yes. If your hand copies it, someone could say you shaped the words. Then you read and I write exactly. You compare each line after. She studied him. Silas did not push. He simply reached for the ink and paper and placed them between them. At last Clara said, Begin with the deed. They worked until afternoon thinned into evening. Clara read each line carefully, voice low, precise, almost cold. Silas wrote in a strong, plain hand. Whenever his pen scratched too loudly across the page, she paused, collected herself, and continued. Twice she corrected him. Once she took the paper back and rewrote a line herself because the wording mattered too much. The work steadied her. That surprised her. For years, papers had been used against her. Sign this. Answer that. Explain yourself. Prove obedience. Accept correction. Let men put words over your life and call it order. Now, line by line, she was putting words back under her own name. When they reached the doctor's statement, her voice changed. It did not break. It emptied. Silas wrote the dates, the injuries, the doctor's careful notes, the phrases that made Thomas Bellamy's good reputation begin to rot on the page. Inconsistent with fall. Inconsistent with accidental impact. Repeated force. By the time Silas finished, the sun had gone down. The lamp between them burned with a steady yellow glow, and snow beyond the window reflected the faint light like a pale sheet. Clara checked the copy against the original. Every word. Every mark. Then she placed it beside the others and sat back. "It is strange," she said. "What is?" "To see my life made orderly on paper." Silas capped the ink. "Does it help?" She thought about it. "No," she said, "not help, that is too soft a word." "What word fits?" She looked at the papers. "It makes it harder for anyone to move the truth around." Silas nodded. "That is worth something." "Yes," she whispered, "it is." If you have ever watched someone gather the courage to speak after years of being silenced, then you understand why this moment mattered. Stay with this story, because Clara's hardest test is no longer the pain she hid. It is the truth she must say out loud when the man who wants to bury it finally knocks at her door. That night, the storm that had been threatening from the west finally began to crawl over the ridge. Not heavy yet. Just a thin snow at first, then a restless wind that pressed around the cabin and scratched at the shutters. Silas checked the latch on the front door and stacked more wood near the stove. Clara watched him from the table. "You think he will come in this weather?" "I think pride makes men underestimate mountains." "Elias does not like being refused." "Neither does winter." That pulled the faintest breath of laughter from her, too small to last, but real. Silas turned from the door. "You should rest." "So should you." "I will." "You say that like a man who has no intention of doing it." He looked at her. "You say that like a woman who knows the habit." "I do." The quiet after that was almost gentle. Clara gathered the papers and tied them in 3 separate bundles. One bundle went into the drawer near the stove, one into the lining of her carpetbag again. The third she wrapped in oilcloth and handed to Silas. He looked down at it. "Where do you want this?" "Somewhere I do not know." His eyes lifted to hers. "If Elias frightens me," she said, forcing the words out plainly, "I may reach for what I know and hide what matters. I need one copy beyond my habits." Silas's expression changed. Not pity. Respect. He took the oilcloth bundle. "Then I will put it where even I have to think hard to find it." "Thank you." He crossed to the floor near the wood box, lifted a loose board with the tip of his knife, and tucked the bundle beneath. Then he fitted the board back into place and moved the kindling over it. Clara watched every movement. "You showed me where you put it," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because not knowing is not the same as being safe. You asked for it beyond your habit, not beyond your right." She stood very still. The wind pressed against the walls. Something in her face softened and trembled at the same time. "I do not know what to do with a man who listens exactly," she said. Silas looked at the stove. "Most days neither do I." That almost made her smile again. Later, when she went to the back room, she paused at the door as she always did. Her hand touched the latch. Silas sat at the table, mending a strap by lamplight, pretending not to watch. The latch did not slide. After a moment, Clara stepped inside and left the door unlatched. Not open. Not yet. But unlatched. Silas did not move for a long time. The wind rose after midnight. It came down from the ridge in hard waves, driving snow against the cabin walls. The shutters knocked once, twice, then held. The chimney moaned. Horses shifted under the lean-to, uneasy in the weather. Clara woke before dawn. Not from fear. From sound. A horse outside. Not theirs. She sat up in the dark, listening. One slow hoof strike. Then another. A man's voice, low beneath the wind. She rose without lighting the lamp and crossed to the door of the back room. Her hand found the latch by habit. It was already open. For a second she stared at it. Then she stepped into the main room. Silas was awake on the cot, sitting upright, boots already on, rifle near but not in his hands. His eyes met hers in the dark. A knock came at the front door. 3 sharp raps. Polite. Certain. Cruel in its calm. Clara's breath caught. Silas stood, but he did not move ahead of her. The knock came again. Then Clara Bellamy's voice carried through the wood. Clara, open the door. It is time to come home. For one breath, Clara was back in Missouri. Not in Silas Ward's cabin. Not beneath a mountain roof with snow pressing against the windows and a steady man standing near her in the dark. She was back in the narrow hall of Thomas Bellamy's house, listening to Elia's voice come through a closed door, soft and smooth, and certain that any woman on the other side would obey if he sounded righteous enough. Clara opened the door. Her fingers curled at her sides. The old habit rose like a command inside her. Answer politely. Do not anger him. Explain yourself before he asks. Make yourself small enough that he loses interest. Then the stove cracked softly in the dark, and she heard Silas draw one slow breath behind her. Not pushing. Not speaking for her. Just there. Clara looked down at her own hands. They were trembling, yes, but they were not empty. They had copied the documents. They had tied the packets. They had mended fences, made bread, held proof, and touched Silas's hand without shame. She was not in Missouri. She was not in Thomas Bellamy's house. And the door in front of her belonged to a cabin where the latch could open from her side. Elias knocked again. Clara, he called, a little sharper now. This weather is worsening. Open the door before you make this more difficult. Silas looked at her. Your choice, he said. 2 words. Not an order, not a rescue, a choice. That made Clara's chest ache worse than fear. She lifted the lamp from the table, struck a match, and lit the wick. Yellow light filled the room slowly, touching the rough log walls, the table, the papers hidden in plain places and secret ones, the rifle Silas had not picked up. Then Clara walked to the door. Silas moved only as far as the stove, where he could be seen but not mistaken for the one in charge. Clara opened the door. Wind shoved snow inside at once, sharp and white across the floor. Silas Bellamy stood on the porch in a black wool coat dusted with flakes. He looked nearly the same as she remembered, tall and narrow, gray at the temples, with a face arranged into concern so practiced it might have been carved there. Behind him stood another man, Clara did not know, younger, with a round face and nervous eyes. He held a leather satchel under his coat to keep it dry. Elias looked past Clara first, into the room, then at Silas. Only after that did he return his eyes to her. My dear Clara, he said, you look pale. The words were gentle. The insult beneath them was not. I have been awakened before dawn, she said. That can pale a person. For a second, Elias' expression paused. Only a second. Then he gave the smallest smile. "Still sharp, I see. May we come in?" "Who is he?" Elias turned slightly. "Mr. Abner Finch. He is a legal clerk from Ridgeback. I thought it wise to have a neutral party present, given the confusion surrounding your situation." The young man shifted, uncomfortable in the snow. Clara looked at him. "Are you a clerk for the territorial court?" "No, ma'am," Finch said quickly. "For Mr. Harker's office, I copy filings sometimes, that is all." Elias' jaw tightened. Silas looked down at the floor, and Clara could almost feel him hiding a smile. "That is honest of you, Mr. Finch," Clara said. Finch swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Elias' eyes cooled. "This is not a porch matter." "No," Clara said, "it is not." She stepped back. Elias entered first, bringing with him the smell of wet wool and cold pride. Finch followed, stamping snow from his boots with an apology that seemed to irritate Elias further. Silas did not move from near the stove. Elias removed his hat and held it in both hands. Humility again. The same performance from old church rooms, widow visits, and public prayers. Clara had seen that hat held against his chest while he spoke kindly about women he later cornered with papers and obligations. "Mr. Ward," Elias said. "Bellamy." The lack of title struck the room like a small hammer. Elias' eyes narrowed, then smoothed. "I hope you understand I have not come as an enemy. I have come out of duty." "Duty often seems to travel in a black coat," Silas said. Clara glanced at him once. It was not the time to smile. But she nearly did. Elias turned back to her. "Clara, I will speak plainly. You left Missouri in a state of grief and confusion. You traveled under the influence of a matrimonial agency that may not have fully understood your condition. The church remains concerned for your welfare." "My welfare did not concern the church much when Thomas was alive." Finch looked down at his boots. Elias' face became tender in the most dangerous way. "Grief distorts memory." "No," Clara said, "fear does. Grief only removed the man causing it." The room went still. Elias lowered his hat slowly. "That is an ugly thing to say about your husband." "It is a true thing. Truth requires care." Clara walked to the table. Her legs wanted to shake, but she did not let them. She placed the lamp in the center, opened the drawer near the stove, and took out the first packet of papers. Elias watched her hands. He recognized the packet before she opened it. Not the cloth, maybe, but the meaning of a woman prepared. His face gave him away, only at the corners. "I have been careful," Clara said, "more careful than any of you believed." She laid the deed on the table. Then the marriage certificate. Then the letters. Then Dr. Reed's statement. Finch stared at the papers with the expression of a man, realizing he had been brought into something much larger than a polite retrieval. Elias did not sit. Clara did. That mattered. In Thomas's house, men sat and Clara stood. Men spoke and Clara answered. Men opened papers and Clara was told where to sign. Now she sat at Silas Ward's table with the lamp beside her and looked up at Elias Bellamy as if he had come to her office. "Would you like to begin with the land," she said, "or with the lies?" Elias' mouth tightened. "You are overwrought." "I am rested." "You are being coached." "I am being heard." His eyes moved to Silas. "By a man who benefits from keeping you here." Silas's voice was low, careful. Elias turned fully toward him. "I do not know what you have been told, Mr. Ward, but this woman is not steady. She suffered greatly after my brother's death. Her judgment cannot be trusted in matters of property or marriage." Clara touched the deed with 2 fingers. "My judgment was trusted enough when Thomas needed my father's land joined to his." Elias looked back at her. She continued, "This deed carries my name. My father's portion came to me. Thomas could not remove my name without my signature." "You speak of law as if you understand it." "I understand my name." Finch looked at the deed, then at Elias. That glance mattered. Clara saw it. So did Elias. He stepped closer to the table. Silas shifted one foot near the stove, hardly anything, but enough to remind the room he had not become furniture. Elias stopped. Clara unfolded the church board letter. "This," she said, "is the agreement between Thomas and your elder board claiming future stewardship of the land if I remained a widow under church care. My signature is not on it." "It was a spiritual arrangement," Elias said. "It discusses acres, titles, and income from crop leasing. That is not spiritual. That is land business with prayer words laid over it." Finch coughed once into his glove. Elias shot him a look. Clara moved to the next paper. "These are your letters. You suggested my leaving might bring shame. You wrote that my late husband's wishes must be honored. You warned me against choices that could not be undone. You were vulnerable. I was free." The words came out before she could think them softer. Free. They seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. For a moment she felt the whole cabin around her, the table under her hand, the lamp light, the open space between her and the door, Silas standing close enough to help and far enough to let her stand. She was afraid. But fear was no longer the only thing in the room. Elias' voice dropped. "Clara, do not mistake stubbornness for strength. You have always been easily influenced by strong emotion." There it was. The old net. Confusion, grief, emotion, weakness. Words meant to soften her, until nothing she said could hold shape. Clara reached for the brown envelope. "No," Elias said. The word came sharp. Too sharp. Finch looked up. Clara's fingers paused on the envelope. Silas's eyes lifted to Elias. The wind pushed against the cabin, and the logs gave a low groan. Elias recovered. "I only mean that private matters should not be handled in front of strangers." "Mr. Finch is your witness," Clara said. "You brought him." "A mistake, perhaps." "No," Clara said, "a useful one." She opened the doctor's statement. Her hand trembled now. She hated that Elias could see it, hated that some part of her body still gave him proof of old power. Then Silas spoke from the stove. "Take your time." Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Clara breathed. She looked at Finch. "Mr. Finch, can you read?" "Yes, ma'am." She slid the statement toward him. "Read the first paragraph aloud." Elias stepped forward. "This is improper." Silas moved then. Only one step. But it placed him between Elias and the table. "No closer," Silas said. Elias looked at him with open dislike now. "You have no authority here." Silas's voice stayed quiet. "This is my cabin. And she is my brother's widow." Clara stood. "No," she said. Both men looked at her. She had not meant to stand, but once she did, she understood why. "I was Thomas Bellamy's wife," she said. "I was never his property. I am not your responsibility. I am not your church's burden. I am not grief-struck cargo to be carried home." Her voice shook. But it did not break. "I am Clara Bellamy. My name is on that deed. My hands carried those papers across half the country. My body carries the marks your family and your church chose not to see. And if you try to drag me back under any claim, those marks and those papers will go before a judge." Finch had gone pale. Elias' face lost its softness entirely. For one bare second Clara saw him, not the elder, not the concerned brother, not the polished man. Just greed. Cold, insulted greed. Then he smiled. It was the worst thing he could have done. "Dear Clara," he said softly, "you forget something." A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the weather. Elias reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper of his own. "This is a sworn statement from Dr. Reed," he said, "written before your departure. It raises concern about your mental condition following Thomas's death." Clara's breath stopped. Silas looked at her, then at the paper. Elias laid it on the table with 2 fingers. "You see," he said, voice smooth again, "you were not the only one who thought to bring proof." Clara stared at the folded paper. For the first time that morning, the room tilted beneath her. Because if Dr. Reed had given Elias a statement too, then the one man whose words could defend her might have also prepared the words that would destroy her. Clara stared at the paper Elias had placed on the table. For a moment, the cabin seemed to pull away from her. The lamp became too bright, the stove too loud, the wind outside too close. She could hear the snow scratching at the wall like dry fingers. She could hear Abner Finch breathing through his nose. She could hear Silas shift his weight near the stove. But louder than all of it was one thought. Dr. Reed had written against her. The same man who had stood in her old kitchen after dark with shame in his eyes. The same man who had pressed a folded statement into her hand and said, "I should have done more." The same man whose words she had carried across the country like a small shield hidden against her heart. If Elias had another paper, another truth, another knife dressed up as ink, then maybe nothing was solid. Maybe nothing had ever been solid. Elias watched her closely. That was his mistake. Clara knew that look. She had seen it on Thomas's face whenever he waited for fear to do his work for him. Elias was not watching the paper. He was watching her reaction. He wanted her to break before anyone read a word. Silas saw it too. "Mr. Finch," Silas said, his voice low, "read it." Elias turned sharply. "This is not your concern." "It is now." Finch looked between the 2 men and swallowed. "Mr. Bellamy brought me only to witness a conversation." "Then witness," Clara said. Her voice surprised her. It was thin, yes, but it was there. Elias looked back at her. "Clara, I would urge you to think before placing private grief into public hands." She put one hand flat on the table. "My grief has been handled by men long enough." Finch looked at the folded paper as if it had become hot. Then, with trembling fingers, he opened it. The room held its breath. He read slowly. "To whom it may concern, I, Dr. Nathaniel Reed, having attended Mrs. Clara Bellamy during the months following the death of her husband, Thomas Bellamy, did observe signs of nervous exhaustion, sleeplessness, trembling, and distress consistent with severe strain." Clara closed her eyes. Those things were true. All of them. She had not slept. She had trembled. She had stood in rooms and forgotten why she had entered them. She had flinched when doors closed. She had burned toast and cried because the smell had taken her back to a morning she wanted to forget. Truth could still be used cruelly when placed in the wrong frame. Finch continued. Mrs. Bellamy expressed repeated fear of remaining in her late husband's community and a desire to leave Missouri as soon as possible. In my professional opinion, she was under significant emotional burden at the time of these statements. Elias' face softened with satisfaction. There it was, the snare. Not madness, not exactly, just enough doubt. Enough for a judge, a clerk, a town, or a church board to say Clara Bellamy had been too burdened to make choices about land, marriage, or her own life. But Finch had not finished. His brows pulled together. He glanced at Elias. Then he kept reading. "However, I find no evidence that Mrs. Bellamy lacked sound judgment in practical or legal matters. Elias' head lifted. Clara opened her eyes. Finch's voice grew stronger, perhaps because he now understood the paper better than the man who had brought it. Her distress appears consistent with prolonged fear and mistreatment, not mental weakness. I further state that Mrs. Bellamy repeatedly showed clear memory, sound reasoning, and careful understanding of her property interests. The cabin went very still. Ilya's face changed. Only slightly. But Clara had survived 9 years by studying slight changes in dangerous faces. She saw anger flash beneath his skin like lightning behind a cloud. Finch read the final lines. If this statement is used to question Mrs. Bellamy's capacity, it must be read alongside my separate medical notes regarding injuries treated during her marriage, as those injuries bear directly upon the source of her distress. Finch stopped. No one moved. Then Silas gave a quiet breath through his nose. Not laughter. Not quite. But close enough that Elias heard it. Clara looked at the doctor's second statement, then at Elias. For the first time since he had entered the cabin, she saw him lose ground. You did not read it all, she said. Elias' jaw tightened. I read enough. No, Clara said. You read what you wanted it to say. Finch folded the paper with more care than Elias had shown and set it on the table, but this time he placed it closer to Clara. I think this belongs with your documents, ma'am. Elias turned on him. You were hired to witness. I witnessed, Finch said, pale but firm. The wind struck the cabin so hard the shutters shook. Clara picked up the doctor's second paper and laid it beside the first. 2 statements now. Not one. 2 pieces of the same truth, divided only because men like Elias love to hold half a page and call it the whole record. Something inside her settled. She was still afraid, but not lost. You came up this mountain with a paper you thought would make me look weak, she said. Instead, it says exactly what I have been saying. I was afraid because I had reason to be afraid. Elias drew himself taller. You speak boldly inside a stranger's cabin. Silas's eyes hardened. Clara lifted a hand slightly without looking at him. Not yet. Silas stayed still. This is not a stranger's cabin, Clara said. Elias looked from her to Silas. So that is how quickly the agency's arrangement became intimate. The insult was quiet but clear enough. Silas took 1 step forward. This time Clara stood before he could speak. No, she said. Elias looked pleased for a second, thinking she had stopped Silas because she feared him. Then she continued. You will not soil this room because you cannot win on paper. His face went cold. Clara's voice trembled, but each word came clean. Silas Ward has not touched me without permission. He has not raised his voice to bend mine. He has not used bread, shelter, scripture, law, or loneliness as a rope. If you intend to shame me by standing in this cabin and suggesting otherwise, then you had better say it plainly so Mr. Finch can write that down too. Finch reached slowly into his satchel and took out a small notebook. Elias saw it. That ended the insult. For a moment, all that could be heard was the stove ticking and the wind dragging snow across the roof. Then Elias looked at Clara with no softness left at all. You think one mountain man and a frightened clerk can protect you from a board with money, reputation, and patience. No, Clara said, I think truth can. Truth is not enough. It is when people stop hiding it. She gathered the papers one by one and placed them in order. Her movements were slow because her hands still shook, but she no longer tried to hide that. Let Elias see her tremble. Let Finch see it. Let the whole world see it if it wanted. A trembling hand could still hold evidence. A trembling voice could still speak law. A trembling woman could still refuse. "I will file my land claim in Ridgeback," she said. "I will send copies to the territorial office. If your board contests the deed, every statement on this table goes with my answer. Dr. Reed's notes, your letters, the board agreement without my signature. And now your own chosen witness has heard you try to use part of a medical statement without reading the rest." Finch cleared his throat. "I did hear that." Elias shot him a look sharp enough to cut leather. Finch lowered his eyes, but he did not take the words back. Clara turned to Elias. "You should go." His mouth bent into something almost like a smile. "And if I refuse?" Silas spoke then. "Then you will spend the storm in my shed with your horse, because you will not spend it in this room." Elias looked at him. "You would put a church elder out in dangerous weather." "No," Silas said, "you put yourself here." The answer landed hard. Elias looked toward the window. Snow was falling thicker now, slanting sideways in the wind. The mountain had turned ugly while they argued. The road down would be mean, and all of them knew it. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes. Stay and lose control of the room. Leave and face the mountain. Men like Elias did not like choices they had not arranged. At last he put his hat on. "This is not over." Clara nodded once. "I know." That answer seemed to disturb him more than any denial would have. He turned to Finch. "We are leaving." Finch hesitated. "In this weather?" "We are leaving." Silas crossed to the door and opened it. Wind and snow burst in, lifting the edges of the papers until Clara pressed both hands down to hold them. Elias stepped onto the porch, his black coat snapping in the gale. Finch followed, clutching his satchel. Before Elias descended the steps, he turned back. "Thomas was right about one thing," he said. "You have always mistaken disobedience for courage." Clara looked at him through the blowing snow. "No," she said, "I mistook obedience for safety. I will not make that mistake again." Elias' face hardened. Then he went down into the storm. Silas shut the door. For a long moment, Clara stood with both hands on the documents, listening to the horses outside, the muffled voices, the wind taking them apart. Then her knees weakened. Silas moved fast, but not too fast. He pulled the chair close behind her just as she sank into it. She covered her face with one hand. "I thought I would fall apart," she whispered. "You did not." "I nearly did." "Nearly is not the same." She gave a sound that was half laugh, half broken breath. Silas knelt beside the stove to add wood, giving her the mercy of not being watched while she gathered herself. The fire caught slowly. Orange light moved across the floor, across the table, across the papers that now seemed heavier than before. Outside, the riders struggled with their horses. Then came a shout. "Finch!" Silas stood. Another shout followed, sharper this time, carried thin by the wind. Clara rose from the chair. "What happened?" Silas crossed to the window and looked out. For the first time all morning, fear entered his face. Clara came beside him. Down by the lower bend of the yard, Elias' horse had reared sideways in the storm. Finch's horse had broken toward the trees. And beyond them, where the mountain road curved along the frozen creek, snow was sliding from the ridge in a white, moving sheet. Not an avalanche big enough to bury the cabin, but big enough to take the road. Big enough to take a man. Silas grabbed his coat. Clara caught his sleeve. Their eyes met. Outside, Clara Bellamy shouted once, and then the snow swallowed the sound. Silas looked from Clara's hand on his sleeve to the white blur beyond the window. The storm had changed its voice. Before, it had howled around the cabin like an angry thing looking for a crack. Now it roared lower, deeper, the way a mountain sounds when snow begins to move where snow should have stayed. Clara heard it too. For one terrible second, she could not move. Elias had come to take her life apart with polite words. He had tried to shame her, corner her, weaken her in front of a witness. A part of her, the hurt part, the tired part, the part that had learned to survive by imagining doors closing behind cruel men, thought of the snow on the road and felt only one word. Good. Then Finch shouted again. Not Elias. Finch. A young man with nervous hands and honest eyes dragged up the mountain to witness a story Elias had shaped for him. He had read the whole doctor's letter aloud. He had said it near Clara instead of Elias. He had, in his small, frightened way, chosen truth. Clara's hand tightened on Silas's sleeve. Finch is out there, she said. Silas nodded once. I know. He took his coat from the peg and reached for rope from the wall hook. His face had gone calm in the way men do when danger leaves no room for wasted feeling. He pulled on his gloves, then shoved the coil of rope over one shoulder. Stay inside, he said. The word struck her wrong. Not because he meant harm. Because every man from her old life had used those same two words as a lock. Stay inside. Stay quiet. Stay small. Silas must have seen the change in her face, because he stopped before opening the door. I mean the storm is blind, he said, not you. Clara looked at the window. Another cry came from outside, thin and half-buried beneath wind. She reached for her coat. No. Clara. I know where the lower bend drops near the creek, she said, tying her scarf with shaking hands. I walked it every morning. You know the mountain, Silas. I know the edges of this yard in the dark. He looked at her then, really looked. There was fear in his eyes, but not the kind that made a cage. It was the fear of a man who understood she was right and hated it. Then you stay tied to me, he said. I will. They moved fast. Silas tied one end of the rope around his waist and the other around Clara's, leaving enough length between them to walk but not enough for the storm to separate them without a fight. He handed her the second lantern. If the wind takes the flame, lower it and shield it under your coat. I know. He paused. Of course you do. It was such a small thing, the way he corrected himself, the way he remembered she had lived hard before she met him. It steadied her more than any promise. Silas opened the door. The storm struck them like a wall. Cold filled Clara's lungs so sharply she could hardly breathe. Snow whipped across her face, stinging her skin, blinding one eye, then the other. The yard she knew had become a shifting white emptiness. The woodpile was a dark lump. The lintel disappeared and reappeared in gusts. The lower road was gone. Silas leaned into the wind. Clara followed. The rope pulled between them, not dragging, just reminding her that she was not alone and not trapped. Each step sank deep. Snow curled around her boots and tugged at her skirt. The lantern flame fought inside its glass. Finch, Silas shouted. The wind tore his voice apart. A faint answer came from the left. Clara pointed, Creek side. They pushed toward the sound. Halfway down the yard, they found Finch's horse, tangled near the broken edge of the fence, reins caught around a low pine branch. The animal rolled its eyes white, sides heaving. Finch was not with it. Silas moved toward the horse. Clara caught his arm. Wait. He looked where she pointed. Beyond the horse, the snow had dropped away in a rough broken shelf where the slide had crossed the road. A dark shape lay near the edge of the creek bank. Finch. He was half buried, one arm free, his satchel still twisted across his chest. He moved barely. Silas dropped to his knees beside him and began clearing snow from his shoulders and face. "Finch," he said, "look at me." The young man coughed, eyes wild. "Mr. Bellamy," he went down, the horse threw him. "Where?" Finch lifted one shaking hand toward the road below. Clara turned. Through the storm, she could see nothing but broken snow and the black line of the frozen creek. Silas pulled Finch upright. "Can you stand?" "I think so." "You think so or you can." Finch tried to rise and cried out, grabbing his ankle. Clara knelt beside him. "It's twisted." Silas looked toward the creek, then back to the cabin. The choice was plain and cruel. Finch could not walk alone. Elias was somewhere below. The snow was still moving in small sheets off the ridge, soft hisses that made Clara's skin crawl. Silas's jaw worked once. "I'll get Finch inside, then go for Elias." "No," Clara said. The word left her before fear could stop it. Both men looked at her. Clara swallowed snow and breath together. "Take Finch inside. I'll go to the creek line." Silas's face hardened. "No. You cannot carry him and search below at the same time. I am not sending you toward a slide." "You are not sending me," she said. "I am going." The wind pushed between them. For a heartbeat she thought he would argue. She braced for it, for command, for anger, for a man's fear turning into ownership. But Silas only stared at her with pain in his eyes. Then he untied the rope from his waist and tied it to a fence post still standing near the bend. "No farther than the rope allows," he said. "You hear me?" "Yes." "If it pulls hard twice, you come back." "Yes." "If you see the snow shift, you drop flat and hold the rope." "I know." He looked at her as if every word cost him. Then he pressed the lantern into her hand. "Yell if you see him." Clara nodded. Silas lifted Finch with a hard grunt, bracing the young man against his shoulder, and began dragging him back toward the cabin. Clara turned toward the creek. The rope followed her like a lifeline. Each step took her farther from the warm square of light in the cabin window, farther from Silas, farther into the white roar where Silas Bellamy had vanished. She hated him. She knew that now. She hated his soft voice, his polished concern, the way he had used Thomas's shadow as a chain. She hated that he had come all this way believing Clara's fear would still answer when he called. But hatred did not make the snow less cold. And if she let him die without trying, she knew exactly what her old guilt would do. It would crawl into the same room where Thomas's last breath still lived and make itself at home. She would not give Elias that space inside her. Not him too. "Elias," she shouted. The wind swallowed it. She moved lower, boots sliding where the road had been. The rope tightened at her waist. She stopped, lifted the lantern, and shielded the glass with her hand. Then she heard it. A low groan. Not words. Human. Clara turned toward the creek and saw a black sleeve moving near a pine stump half covered in snow. Her heart struck hard. She dropped to her knees and crawled the last few feet, digging with her gloved hands. Elias lay on his side near the creek bank, one leg pinned under packed snow and broken brush. His face was gray with cold, his hat gone, hair plastered to his forehead. Blood marked his temple, not much, but enough to make his age show all at once. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he did not seem to understand who she was. Then he did. "Clara," he breathed. She stared down at him. All his authority was gone now. No church board, no letters, no witness, no black coat arranged into dignity, just a man in the snow, frightened and hurt. "Can you move your leg?" she asked. He tried, then gasped. "No." She looked at the snow packed around him. The slide had pinned him but not buried him. Not yet. Another shift could change that. She pulled the rope twice. Hard. Then she set the lantern down and started digging. Elias watched her hands. Why, he whispered. Clara did not stop, because Finch is already safe. No, his voice trembled. Why help me? She dug snow away from his coat, from his knee, from the branch pressing across his boot. Her breath came in white bursts. Because I am not what your family said I was. Elias shut his eyes. Maybe from pain. Maybe from shame. Maybe from neither. The rope jerked behind her. Silas was coming back. Clara kept digging until her fingers burned inside her gloves. When Silas reached them, he dropped to his knees without a word and took over the heavier work, breaking snow crust with his forearms, pulling branches free, testing Elias' pinned leg with careful hands. Broken? Clara asked. Maybe, maybe not. We need him inside. Elias groaned as Silas shifted him. Clara took the lantern and held it high. Together they dragged him up from the creek bank, one brutal foot at a time. Elias cried out twice. Clara flinched once, not from the sound, but from the old memory of a man's pain becoming her fault. Silas saw it. He is hurt, he said over the wind. You did not hurt him. She nodded, though her throat had closed. By the time they reached the cabin, Clara's legs shook so badly she could hardly climb the steps. Finch lay near the stove with a blanket over him, pale but awake. His eyes widened when he saw Elias carried in. Silas laid Elias on the floor near the table. Clara shut the door against the storm. The sudden quiet inside the cabin felt almost violent. Wind still roared outside, but now it was held back by walls. Silas knelt beside Elias and began checking his leg. Clara stood near the door, snow melting from her coat, hands red, breath uneven. Elias turned his head toward her. His lips trembled. For once he had no polished sentence ready. If this story has touched something deep in you, remember this moment. Clara did not become strong because the storm ended. She became strong while standing inside it, choosing who she would be even when no one could force her anymore. Elias swallowed. You came back, he said. Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she took off her gloves and laid them beside the stove. No, she said quietly, I went forward. Silas looked up from Elias' injured leg. Their eyes met across the room. And in that look, something changed between them forever. Not because Clara had saved Elias. Because she had saved herself from becoming a prisoner of his cruelty. But the mountain was not finished with them. The road was buried. The storm was rising again. Elias and Finch were both hurt, and the only shelter for all four of them was the same small cabin where the truth had just been spoken. By nightfall, Clara would have to sit across from the man who had tried to ruin her. And this time, there would be no door between them. By nightfall, the cabin had become both shelter and prison. The storm sealed every wall with sound. Snow packed against the lower windows until the glass showed only white. The road to Ridgeback was gone beneath the slide, and the lower bend near the creek was buried under a heavy shelf of broken snow and pine limbs. Even Silas, who knew that mountain the way most men knew their own hands, had stood on the porch after bringing Elias inside and said nothing for a long time. That silence told Clara enough. No one was leaving before morning. Maybe not even then. Inside, Abner Finch lay on Silas's cot with his injured ankle wrapped in cloth and packed with cold snow. He looked ashamed every time Clara passed him, as if being hurt had somehow made him a burden. She had seen that look in herself too many times not to understand it. You are not in the way, she told him while setting a cup of broth near his hand. Finch blinked up at her. Ma'am. You keep looking like you expect someone to scold you for needing help. His face reddened. I did not mean to. I know. He looked down into the broth. Mr. Bellamy said you were unstable. Clara's hands paused. Finch swallowed. He said you might speak convincingly, but that your grief had made you dangerous to yourself. He said I was only needed to make record if you refused reasonable counsel. Clara sat slowly in the chair beside the cot. And now, she asked. Finch looked toward the table, where the documents were tied again in neat bundles. Then toward Elias, who lay on a blanket near the stove, his injured leg braced between two split boards Silas had cut and wrapped tight with strips of clean cloth. Now I think a man should be careful when he tells only half a story, Finch said. Clara nodded. It was a small sentence from a small clerk in a mountain cabin, but it mattered. Sometimes the truth did not need a whole town at first. Sometimes it needed only one person who had been lied to and chose not to stay lied to. Near the stove, Elias stirred. Silas crouched beside him, checking the splint. The fall had not broken the bone clean through, but the leg was badly hurt. His shoulder was bruised from striking the ground, and the cut at his temple had stopped bleeding after Clara pressed a clean cloth to it. He had accepted the care in stiff silence, each small act of help seeming to offend him more than pain. He opened his eyes and saw Clara watching. For once, Elias looked away first. That should have felt like victory. It did not. It felt strange, heavy, almost sad. Clara stood and went to the stove. She stirred the beans with a wooden spoon, added salt, and set coffee to heat again. Her dress was damp at the hem from the rescue. Her hair had come loose down her back. Her hands still burned from digging snow, and her shoulders ached from pulling Elias up the creek bank. She had saved him. The thought kept returning. Not gently. Not proudly. Like a question she did not yet know how to answer. Silas came beside her. You need to sit. So do you. I will. You always say that before you do not. He glanced at her then, and despite the storm, despite Elias breathing behind them, despite Finch hurt on the cot, something warm passed through his tired face. You are learning my faults. I learned that one early. He took the spoon from her hand, not grabbing, only taking when her fingers let it go. Sit, Clara. She should have objected. Instead, she sat at the table. That surprised her more than him. Silas served supper as best he could. Beans, bread, coffee, not enough comfort for what had happened, but enough food to keep bodies working. He gave Finch's bowl first, then Clara, then set one beside Elias. Elias stared at it. I can feed myself, he said. Silas looked down at him, then do. There was no cruelty in it, no softness either. Elias pushed himself up on one elbow and reached for the bowl. His hand shook. The spoon slipped once, striking the edge of the bowl with a small sound. Clara flinched before she could stop herself. Everyone saw it. The room froze. Elias looked at her. For a second, shame crossed his face. Not the full weight of it, not enough to make him different, but a crack at least in the smooth wall of his certainty. You still do that, he said quietly. Clara's mouth tightened. Yes. I thought leaving would cure you. Silas looked up sharply. Clara held his gaze across the room and gave the smallest shake of her head. Let me. She turned back to Elias. Leaving did not cure me. It gave me enough quiet to notice I was hurt. Elias looked down at the bowl in his hand. Thomas was not always cruel, he said. The words landed wrong. Clara felt something old and hard rise in her, but she kept her voice steady. That does not matter the way you think it does. He could be generous. Yes. He gave money to widows. Yes. He helped build the church roof. Yes. Elias looked at her, almost pleading now, as if he needed the man he had admired to remain whole in someone's eyes. Then you understand he was not a monster. Clara breathed in. The old version of her would have softened the truth to make the room easier. She would have said perhaps not. She would have given Elias something to carry home that did not hurt. But old obedience had cost her too much. No, she said. I understand that monsters do not need to be monsters every minute for their harm to be real. Finch looked down. Silas stood very still near the stove. Elias' face twisted, not with anger this time, but with the pain of a belief giving way. My mother loved him, he said. Mine feared him. Elias shut his mouth. Clara leaned forward, hands folded on the table. You knew enough, Elias. He did not answer. You knew enough to look away. You knew enough to control the story after he died. You knew enough to come after the land instead of asking what kind of life I had survived. His eyes lifted. The land belonged to the family. My name is on the deed. It was meant to serve the church. It was meant to keep me dependent. He looked away again. The wind slammed against the cabin so hard Finch spilled broth onto his blanket. He apologized at once, and Clara stood to help him, but Silas was already there with a cloth. For a little while, the storm took over all speech. The fire had to be fed. Snow had to be pushed back from the front door so it would not seal them in completely. The horses had to be checked under the lean-to. Silas went out with a lantern tied to his wrist, and Clara stood at the window until his shape returned from the white dark. When he came back, his coat was crusted with snow and his beard white at the edges. Horses are standing, he said. Elias' horse is gone. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Clara noticed that too. No matter what he had done, the loss of an animal still hurt. It was another strange thing about people. Their hearts could close in one room and open in another. Silas removed his coat and looked at the door. Snow is still sliding in small sheets below the bend. We wait till morning. What about Ridgeback? Finch asked. No one can reach us tonight. The statement settled heavily. Elias looked toward the papers on the table. When the road opens, you mean to file them? Yes, Clara said. If you do, the church will be ruined. No, Clara answered. The truth will be known. What ruins them will be what they did with it. He laughed once, but it was weak. You learned sharpness out here. I learned it before I came. Out here I learned I could use it. Silas's eyes moved to her. She felt the look and did not turn away from it. For the first time she let herself understand what had been growing between them. Not a sudden love born from rescue or danger. Not a soft story to cover hard truths. Something quieter, stronger, built from offered space, shared work, listening, copied papers, and a hand left open on a table. Silas did not make her feel saved. He made her feel standing was possible. That was different. That was more. Later, after the bowls were washed and the fire burned low, Finch drifted into a restless sleep. Elias lay awake near the stove, staring at the rafters. Silas sat at the table sharpening a small knife, not because it needed sharpening, but because his hands needed a task. Clara sat across from him, with the doctor's statements before her. 2 pages. 2 truths. One of pain. One of capacity. For years, she had thought healing would mean forgetting the old house, the narrow halls, Thomas's hand on her sleeve, Elias' voice telling her what was proper. Now she understood that healing might mean remembering it clearly without letting it command her. She looked at Elias. Tomorrow, when we go to Ridgeback, you will come with us. Elias turned his head. I can barely stand. Then we will take the wagon. Silas stopped sharpening. Clara continued. You will tell Harker's office that Mr. Finch witnessed everything said here. You will state that the board's land agreement does not carry my signature. You will not claim I was taken, confused, or unable to decide for myself. Elia stared at her. And if I refuse? She touched the doctor's papers. Then I file everything, all of it. Not just the land claim, not just the deed, every letter, every statement, every record. His face went gray. You would expose Thomas. I would expose the truth. You would expose yourself too. Clara felt the old shame reach for her. This time it found no handle. Yes, she said. The word came quietly. Silas looked at her, as if he had just watched sunrise enter a room. Elia stared for a long moment, then he looked away. You really are not afraid of it anymore. Clara thought before answering. I'm afraid, she said, but I am done obeying fear. Silas set the knife down. The room became very still. Outside, the storm began to ease at last. Not end, but ease. The roar lowered to a moan. The snow against the windows stopped climbing. Somewhere beyond the cabin, a branch shed its heavy load with a soft rush. Clara stood and crossed to the back room. At the doorway, she paused as she had on so many nights. Her hand went to the latch by habit. Then she looked back. Silas was watching her, Elias too. Finch slept on. Clara opened the door wider and left it that way. No speech. No announcement. Just an open door. She went inside and lay down without closing it. For a long while, she could still see the glow from the stove on the cabin wall. She could hear Silas moving quietly in the main room. She could hear Elias breathing near the fire, the man who had tried to carry her back into a life that no longer existed. The door stayed open, and Clara slept. When morning came, the storm had passed, but the mountain looked changed. Snow lay deep and clean across the yard, sparkling under a pale sun. The lower road was buried, but not impossible. Silas stood at the window, studying the ridge, while Clara wrapped the documents in oilcloth and placed them in her coat. Elias was awake. He looked older. Finch sat on the cot, pale but ready, his notebook in hand. Clara tied her scarf and looked at Silas. Can the wagon make it? Silas looked from the road to her. If we clear the bend and go slow. Then we go slow. Elias pushed himself up on one elbow. Clara. She turned. For once he did not sound polished. He sounded tired. If I make the statement you want at Harker's office, will you hold back the doctor's records? Clara looked at the man who had come for her fear and found her standing instead. I will hold back what is not needed, she said, but I will not hide it to protect men who never protected me. Elias lowered his eyes. That was the closest thing to surrender she was going to get. Silas opened the door. Cold sunlight poured into the cabin. Clara stepped out first. Her boots sank into fresh snow. The mountain air filled her lungs clean and sharp. Behind her, Silas helped Finch. Elias followed slowly, leaning hard on a cut branch Silas had shaped into a crutch. Down the buried road, Pine Hollow waited. And with it, the first public truth Clara Bellamy would ever speak in her own name. The wagon rolled into Pine Hollow just after noon, slow as a funeral and twice as watched. Every window along the main street seemed to hold a face. Men stepped out of the mercantile and stopped speaking. Mrs. Miller stood in her doorway with a flour sack in her arms, her eyes moving from Silas to Clara, then to Elias Bellamy lying stiff in the back of the wagon with his injured leg braced in splints. Abner Finch sat beside him, pale but upright, one ankle wrapped tight and resting on a folded blanket. He held his notebook against his chest as if it had become more than paper. Clara sat on the wagon bench beside Silas. Not behind him. Beside him. Her hands rested in her lap, folded over the oilcloth bundle that held the documents. Her face was tired from the storm, from the long morning clearing the road, from the weight of everything still ahead. But she did not look down when people stared. Silas guided the horses toward Harker's office. The building was small, with a faded sign hanging crooked over the door and frost on the window corners. A pot-bellied stove smoked inside, and 2 chairs sat beside a desk stacked with ledgers, notices, and ink bottles. Harker himself, a thin man with spectacles and careful manners, stepped outside before the wagon even stopped. "Good Lord," he said, "what happened up there?" Silas set the brake. "Mountain happened." Harker looked at Elias. "You need a doctor." "I need my statement taken first," Elias said. His voice was rough from pain, but there was no polish in it now. Clara looked back at him. All the way down the mountain, Elias had said almost nothing. He had watched the road, watched the snowbanks, watched Clara's back as if seeing a person where he had once seen only a problem to be managed. Harker helped Finch down first. Silas and Jonah Pike, who had come running from the mercantile, lifted Elias carefully and brought him inside. Clara followed last. Inside Harker's office, the town pressed near the windows and opened door until Harker snapped, "This is not a theater," and shut the door on half of Pine Hollow's curiosity. Mrs. Miller slipped in before it closed, carrying hot coffee without asking permission. "People talk less foolish when their mouths are full," she said, setting cups on the desk. No one argued. Clara stood before Harker's desk and untied the oilcloth bundle. Her fingers did not tremble. That was the first thing she noticed. The second thing was Silas standing near the wall, arms relaxed, face quiet, giving her the room without leaving her alone. Harker adjusted his spectacles. "Mrs. Bellamy, Mr. Finch told me enough on the way in from the wagon to know this needs proper record. Begin where you choose." Clara placed the deed on the desk. "My name is on this land." Harker looked at the deed, then at her. "Yes, ma'am, it appears so." She placed the church board agreement beside it. "My name is not on this." Harker read more slowly. His mouth flattened. "No, ma'am," he said, "it is not." She laid down Elias' letters. Then Dr. Reed's first statement. Then the second statement Elias had brought himself, the one he had hoped would make her seem unfit, the one that had instead named her distress as the mark of mistreatment, not weakness. Last, Abner Finch opened his notebook and read his account of what had happened in Silas Ward's cabin. He read Elias' attempt to use the doctor's statement. He read Clara's refusal. He read how the full paper had been spoken aloud. He read how Elias had left during the storm against warning. His voice shook once, then steadied. Harker wrote everything down. When he finished, the office was very quiet. Then Harker turned to Elias. "Mr. Bellamy, do you contest Mrs. Bellamy's claim to the land?" Elias sat in the chair by the stove, one leg stretched before him. His face had gone gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. For a long moment, he did not answer. Clara felt the whole room waiting. In another life, that silence would have frightened her. It would have made her rush to fill it, to soften it, to rescue everyone from discomfort. Now she let it stand. At last Elias said, "No." Harker dipped his pen. "Say it plainly." Elias' jaw moved. Then quieter, "I do not contest her claim." Harker wrote, "And do you claim Mrs. Bellamy was taken from Missouri against her will?" Elias closed his eyes briefly. "No." "Do you claim she lacks the judgment to manage her property?" Elias opened his eyes and looked at Clara. There was something in his face she had not expected. Not apology, not enough. Not sorrow, not cleanly. But defeat had broken the smoothness from him, and beneath it was a man who had spent too long serving a lie because the lie served him back. No, he said, I do not. Clara breathed. Not deeply. Not dramatically. Just one breath she had been holding for 9 years. Harker wrote the final lines, sanded the ink, and signed his name. Finch signed as witness. Mrs. Miller signed too, because Harker said a town woman's witness would not hurt the record and might help more than some men expected. Then Harker turned the paper toward Clara. Your signature here. Clara looked at the line. Clara Bellamy. For a moment she saw every hand that had tried to guide hers. Thomas pressing papers toward her, Elias speaking softly across desks, church elders telling her obedience was peace, the doctor looking away, the town back east pretending not to see. Then she took the pen. She signed her name slowly. Clara Bellamy. Clear. Dark. Her own. Harker let the ink dry before folding the papers. I'll send copies to the territorial office with the next courier. Until then, this record stands here. Anyone asks, I have it. Elias leaned back spent. Clara gathered her own copies and turned to him. For the first time, there was nothing between them but truth. You may return to Missouri when the doctor clears you to travel, she said. Tell the board I will not come back. Tell them the land is mine. Tell them if they reach for it again, I will send every page. Elias looked at her. And Thomas, he asked. Clara's throat tightened, but she did not look away. Tell them Thomas is dead, she said, and I am not. Something moved through the room. Mrs. Miller lowered her eyes. Finch looked at the floor. Silas looked at Clara, as if he had watched the mountain itself split open and find a spring beneath the rock. Elias said nothing more. That was his final gift, though perhaps he did not know it. Silence. A week later, the road to the lower pass cleared enough for Elias to leave Pine Hollow under the care of a stage driver and a doctor's note. He did not come to Silas's cabin again. He sent one message through Harker before he left. The church board would not contest the land. Clara read the note twice. Then she folded it and placed it in the stove. Silas stood beside her while the paper curled black in the flame. You sure? He asked. Yes, she said. I have the record. I do not need his words in my house. My house. She heard herself say it and looked up quickly. Silas heard it too. His expression softened in that quiet way of his, as if joy in him never rushed, only deepened. Outside, the afternoon sun lay bright on the snow. The storm had passed days ago, but its marks remained everywhere. A broken fence rail near the lower bend. A pine limb snapped clean. Deep wagon ruts frozen hard in the road. The mountain remembered what had happened. So did Clara. But remembering no longer meant living inside it. The days that followed did not turn magical. Pain did not vanish because papers were filed. Some mornings, Clara still woke before dawn with her heart racing. Some sharp sound still sent her body backward before her mind could catch up. Some nights, she still reached for the latch. But more often now, she left the door open. She walked the boundary line because she liked knowing the land, not because fear dragged her out there. She rewrote Silas's ledgers until even he admitted February might not defeat them. She taught him to mark flower use properly. He taught her how to read weather from clouds gathering above the ridge. In spring, when the snow thinned and creek water ran silver under the ice, Silas took her to a flat clearing beyond the south fence and taught her to shoot. He did not stand over her. He stood beside her. The first shot startled her so badly she stepped back, breath caught, eyes wide. Silas said nothing. He only waited. She tried again. By the fifth shot, she hit the old tin cup he had set on a stump. By the sixth, she smiled. A real smile. Wide enough that Silas forgot, for a moment, what he had meant to say. What? She asked. He shook his head. Nothing. You look amused. I am wondering how many men were foolish enough to think you weak. Clara lowered the rifle and looked toward the mountains. Too many, she said. Then she turned back to him, and this time there was no shadow between her eyes and his. That summer, the official land record arrived from the territorial office. Clara's claim was confirmed. The Missouri land was hers to sell, lease, or keep. She read the paper at the table where she had once laid out the proof of her pain. Silas waited across from her. What will you do with it? He asked. She folded the paper carefully. Lease it to the farmer who worked my father's fields, she said, at a fair rate. He has daughters. They should see land feed a family, not trap a woman. Silas nodded. And the money? She looked around the cabin. The repaired fence, the clean shelves, the curtains she had sewn from flour sacks, the books now stacked beside her chair, the back room door standing open in broad daylight. I thought I came here because I had nowhere else to go, she said. Silas watched her. But I was wrong. I came here because some part of me still believed there was a place where I could breathe. He swallowed once. And is there? Clara stood and walked to the open door. Outside, the mountains were green now, washed in late summer light. The horses grazed near the fence she had braced with her own hands. The road to Pine Hollow curved through the pines, no longer looking like an escape route or a threat. Just a road. She turned back to Silas. Yes, she said, there is. He rose slowly, as if afraid too sudden a movement might break the moment. Clara crossed the room and stopped before him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she reached for his hand. Not fingertips this time. Her whole hand. I am staying, she said. His thumb moved once over her knuckles. Because you choose to. Because I choose to. That was the only vow they needed that day. Months later, when Pine Hollow spoke of Clara Bellamy, they no longer spoke in whispers about the woman who came pale and quiet on the stagecoach. They spoke of the woman who filed her land claim in her own name, the woman who kept Silas Ward's winter supplies so well that no storm caught him short again, the woman who could mend a fence, bake cinnamon bread, read legal papers, and shoot a tin cup clean off a stump when she cared to. Some still wondered what marks she carried beneath her sleeves. But no one who mattered asked. Because Clara no longer owed the world a look at her pain to prove it had been real. And Silas never once asked to see what she did not offer. Years later, on a golden autumn evening, Clara stood beside the south fence watching the sunset burn copper over the Bitterroot ridges. A blue ribbon held her hair back, faded now from weather and washing. Silas came to stand beside her with 2 cups of coffee, and the old horse under the linta gave a soft nicker. The cabin glowed behind them. The door stood open. Clara took the coffee and leaned her shoulder lightly against Silas's arm. There had been no grand rescue. No perfect forgetting. No day when the past disappeared like snow in spring. There had only been one steady kindness after another, one true word after another, one open door after another. And in that slow, ordinary mercy, Clara had found something stronger than safety. She had found herself. So if this story touched your heart, remember Clara when life feels too heavy to carry. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a hand that does not grab, a voice that does not command, and a door left open until you are ready to walk through it. And from that day on, whenever the mountain wind moved through the pines, Silas would look at Clara standing in the light and remember the first time he saw her step off the stagecoach with pain hidden beneath her dress. He had thought then that his heart had broken for her. But he understood now. It had not broken. It had opened.